After dumping his wife for a younger mistress, the millionaire was left bankrupt and alone. He was the talk of the city, handsome, powerful, and rumored to be worth more than a fortune. His lavish parties at the Ritz-Carlton dazzled socialites who whispered his name with a mix of envy and admiration. But behind the gleaming facade, cracks were forming. One shocking night, he ruthlessly discarded the devoted wife who had stood by him from the very beginning, all to chase the allure of a younger mistress. Everyone gasped at his audacity. Some even admired his fearless ambition. Little did they know, fate had already begun weaving a poetic justice. Soon his empire would crumble beneath him, leaving him bankrupt and utterly alone. Lionel Prescott was not born into wealth. He grew up in a cramped two-bedroom row house in Newark, New Jersey, surviving on free school meals and wearing second-hand clothes. His father, a factory worker, passed away when Lionel was just 10, leaving him and his mother to scrape by on minimal support. Late at night, as he lay in his sagging twin bed, Lionel vowed to claw his way out of poverty by any means necessary. The opportunity arrived when he gained a partial scholarship to study finance at Rutgers University. Lionel dove into his coursework with fierce determination, balancing a part-time job at a diner with nights spent poring over market analyses. By the time he graduated, the crackling spark of ambition that glowed in his eyes had grown into a blazing fire. He entered a small brokerage firm, working as a junior analyst. To the astonishment of his colleagues, Lionel showed an uncanny intuition for spotting emerging tech stocks before they boomed. Around this time, he met Grace Remington, a fellow Rutgers alum who studied business administration. They connected at a networking event in Manhattan, bonding over shared roots of hardship and big dreams. Grace found Lionel's ambition exhilarating. He projected confidence about a future where they would never have to struggle again. A few months into dating, they moved in together, combining their meager savings into a plan for the future. Lionel's big break came when he convinced a group of angel investors to back his startup, an online trading platform focusing on niche emerging markets. He poured every ounce of energy into the project. Day by day, he charmed more investors with his grand visions, eventually landing a feature in Forbes as one of the young entrepreneurs on track to change the financial landscape. Within 2 years, Lionel's net worth soared, catapulting him from a no-name analyst to a budding tycoon. Through all those relentless hours, Grace stayed by his side. She handled operations, supported office logistics, and even taught herself coding basics to handle minor tech issues. In the frantic swirl of mergers, expansions, and new product launches, Grace was the steady anchor in Lionel's life, his confidant, strategist, and emotional rock. Yet beneath the surface, the seeds of a future betrayal were quietly sprouting. Lionel's obsession with success stoked an ego that demanded ever more validation. The raw humility that once propelled him began to erode, replaced by a thirst for glamour, admiration, and the next big score. He never suspected how far he'd drift from the very woman who had helped him climb out of the trenches. When Lionel's startup went public, his net worth shot up to 8 figures almost overnight. To celebrate, he leased a penthouse in Midtown Manhattan, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a shimmering panorama of the city's skyline. Within months, paparazzi caught wind of his lavish spending, brand-new sports cars, VIP tables at exclusive clubs, extravagant dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. Grace found herself swept into a whirlwind of high-end galas, charity fundraisers, and black tie soirees. At first, she relished the chance to wear designer gowns like a dream come true for the girl from a humble background. Still, her feet remained planted on the ground. She worried about Lionel's restless pursuit of bigger conquests. The more success he tasted, the more he seemed to hunger for that endless adrenaline rush. The turning point came when Lionel snagged an invitation to speak at a major finance conference in Hong Kong. Rather than keep a low profile, he flew there in a private jet, sporting a newly tailored suit from Savile Row. He reveled in the flashbulbs, the adulation from budding entrepreneurs who idolized him. Grace, who accompanied him, watched with mixed emotions. She admired his achievements, but sensed something missing, an intangible warmth, a humility that once drew them together. At a post-conference party, Lionel mingled with billionaire hedge fund managers and real estate moguls, forging alliances. Grace tried to join the conversation, yet found herself feeling out of place. Over the loud music, she caught snippets of Lionel's voice, speaking with an air she hardly recognized, confident to the point of arrogance, brandishing deals like trophies. That same night, while riding back to their hotel, Lionel dismissed her concerns about sustainable growth and ethical partnerships. "This is how it works at the top," he said, brushing off her caution. Returning to New York, Lionel ramped up his expansions. He acquired smaller fintech startups, dabbled in real estate, and even ventured into philanthropic projects for the publicity, mostly. Photographs of him cutting ribbons at youth centers peppered business magazines, fueling his brand as a self-made millionaire with a heart. Yet behind closed doors, he had grown edgy and distant. Grace, once the partner in every sense, now felt overshadowed by the glare of his ambition. Small cracks emerged in their relationship. He began belittling her cautious approach to risk, ignoring her pleas to slow down. Old friends from their early days found themselves uninvited to gatherings that Lionel deemed too important for amateurs. When Grace attempted to reconnect with them, Lionel accused her of clinging to a past that no longer served them. Despite the friction, Grace remained hopeful. Perhaps, she reasoned, this was a phase. Perhaps once Lionel reached a plateau in his empire building, he'd rediscover the man who valued loyalty and love over superficial thrills. She had no inkling that a storm was forming, one carrying the name of a younger, captivating presence who would push her completely out of Lionel's life. It all began innocently enough, at least. That was how Lionel justified it to himself. He was hosting an exclusive cocktail party at the Plaza Hotel to woo potential investors from Europe. The guest list boasted aristocrats, financiers, and celebrities from across the globe. Amid the swirl of tuxedos and champagne flutes, Lionel's attention was snagged by a vivacious young woman with wavy auburn hair and an easy laugh. She was introduced as Celeste Marino, a 20-something social media influencer rumored to have a knack for promoting lifestyle brands. Word around the room was that she had just snagged a partnership with a major cosmetics company. From the moment Lionel laid eyes on her, a quiet spark ignited a magnetism that seemed to make time slow. She was confident, alluring, and quick-witted in conversation. When he offered her a glass of vintage crystal, her gracious smile sent a jolt through him he hadn't felt in years. Throughout the evening, Celeste stuck near Lionel's side. Investors glanced on with mild curiosity, while Grace, who was busy overseeing event logistics, hardly noticed. Celeste asked Lionel about his business expansions, leaning in a little too close. He indulged her curiosity, bragging about a new technology platform poised to revolutionize digital banking. They talked for hours, bantering about startup culture, the mania of social media, and their shared love of fast cars. As the night wore on, Lionel realized he wasn't just charmed by Celeste's beauty, he was enthralled by her admiration. She seemed genuinely impressed by his achievements, praising his every anecdote with bright-eyed enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Grace's encouragement, once deeply cherished, had become routine, familiar, even expected. In the weeks after that fateful party, Lionel found excuses to see Celeste. He invited her to product launch events, then private dinners under the guise of business consultations. He told himself it was purely strategic, harnessing her influencer reach to expand his brand. But with every meeting, the lines between professional courtesy and flirtation blurred. Celeste would graze his hand accidentally or laugh a second too long at his jokes. He responded with extravagant gifts, a handbag from Chanel, a VIP pass to a New York Fashion Week runway. She posted about it on Instagram, her massive following buzzing with envy. Grace caught fragments of rumor from staff and overheard half-hushed conversations. When she confronted Lionel, he scoffed at the notion of impropriety. "It's nothing. She's just an influencer helping our brand. Don't be childish." Grace tried to believe him, but a chill settled in her heart. The sincerity in his eyes, once so endearing, was now overshadowed by a flicker of restlessness. Steadily, Celeste's presence became unstoppable, commanding Lionel's time, fueling gossip among his circle. And though Grace fought to maintain normalcy, the unspoken truth was taking shape. Lionel had found someone younger, someone who stroked his ego in a way he now craved more than loyalty or history. This intangible shift would soon destroy the foundations of a marriage once built on shared dreams. Grace stood by the panoramic windows of their penthouse, overlooking the shimmering Manhattan skyline. It was nearly midnight, and Lionel still wasn't home. In the past, she would have believed he was stuck in some high-stakes business meeting, but a swirling dread told her there was another reason, a reason with auburn hair and a seductive gaze. The key in the lock signaled his return. He waltzed in, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers, tie loosened, eyes defiant. The tension in the room crackled. Summoning courage, Grace tried to keep her voice steady. "Where were you?" Lionel shrugged off his jacket, his demeanor defensive. "Meetings and drinks," he said curtly, avoiding eye contact. "Nothing you need to worry about." She swallowed hard, drawing a breath. "I'm worried because I hear your name linked with hers, Celeste Marino, at every corner. Even your staff is whispering. Is something going on between you two?" His expression hardened. "You're overreacting. She's a valuable contact for the brand. We talk often. That's all." Grace's chest clenched. She wanted to trust him, but his tone reeked of evasion. She forced out the next sentence, voice trembling. "Have you slept with her?" Silence. The quiet that settled was a scream of its own. Lionel's jaw clenched, and then came his brutal reply. "You've lost your mind, Grace. I've grown tired of your insecurities." He turned away, marching into the bedroom. Grace followed, tears burning her eyes. She found him rifling through his wardrobe. Heart pounding, she demanded an honest answer. Instead of denial or contrition, he erupted. "For years, I've carried you on this ride. Now you want to hold me back." He whirled to face her. "Celeste understands what it means to be hungry for success. You just cling to old ways. I need someone with energy, not a nagging voice questioning every move." Each word landed like a punch to Grace's gut. She recalled their humble start, how they'd battled adversity together. But the man before her spoke a foreign language of arrogance and entitlement. She tried to argue, to remind him of their shared struggles, but he snapped. "You want the truth?" His voice trembled with anger. "Yes, Celeste and I have been seeing each other, and no, I'm not sorry. If you won't support my vision, maybe we're done." Grace staggered at the raw finality. "You can't just throw away our marriage for some fling," she pleaded. But Lionel merely scoffed, stepping past her to fetch a suitcase. He started stuffing clothes, ignoring her pleas. The next morning, he left, leaving Grace sobbing amid the scattered remnants of a marriage undone. As the door clicked shut, Grace recalled the vow they'd made, to stand by each other through every up and down. In one savage stroke, Lionel had shattered that vow. The seeds of heartbreak now sowed, the stage was set for the unstoppable downfall that would soon claim Lionel's fortune, pride, and illusions of eternal success. News of Lionel's split from Grace spread through their social circle like wildfire. Rumors circulated that he'd abandoned his wife for a younger influencer. Some took it as normal in a cutthroat city where men of power were rumored to chase endless novelty. Others expressed shock, having witnessed the bond Grace and Lionel once shared. But the real blow came when a prominent gossip column in the New York Post ran a sensational piece titled "Fintech Mogul's Affair Sparks Divorce, Younger Mistress at Center Stage." The article detailed Lionel's meteoric rise and insinuated that success had gone to his head. They described Celeste Marino as a glamorous social media star with her sights set on Manhattan's wealthiest. Paparazzi snapped them strolling arm in arm near Soho's designer boutiques, confirming the rumors. Lionel, fueled by defiance, didn't bother hiding. He flaunted Celeste at high-profile events, ignoring the whispers from business partners who frowned upon the drama. Meanwhile, Grace retreated into her grief. She vacated the penthouse, unwilling to remain in a space that reeked of betrayal. The divorce papers arrived soon after, served with a stiffly formal note from Lionel's lawyers. He offered a decent settlement, but it felt transactional. Strangers scoured their marital accounts, deciding who got what. It sickened Grace that the intangible threads of their history were reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. In a rare moment of empathy, some tabloids championed Grace as the wronged wife, painting Lionel as a callous opportunist. She had contributed to his company's early success, they reminded, but now found herself ousted for a younger rival. Grace largely avoided interviews. Still, a well-researched profile in Vanity Fair recounted their humble beginnings, stirring public sympathy. Social media lit up with condemnation for Lionel's callous betrayal, though Celeste's legion of fans championed her hustle, claiming Grace was just bitter. Through all this, Lionel pressed on, dismissing the negativity. He partnered with Celeste on brand campaigns, merging his financial clout with her online influence. Companies vied for a piece of their combined star power. A new bubble of synergy formed around them. For a while, it seemed unstoppable. Lionel was at the apex of fame, wealth, and romance. Grace tried to rebuild her life, channeling her heartbreak into forging a new consulting career. Yet, each day was a battle against memories that threatened to suffocate her. In her quiet apartment, she whispered a prayer that Lionel would one day realize the damage he'd wrought. She dared not hope for reconciliation, but she did yearn for accountability, a moment when he'd see that success means nothing without integrity. Fate was already in motion. Lionel's unbridled arrogance and Celeste's thirst for a lavish lifestyle had set them on a collision course with disaster. And when the fall came, it would be swifter and more brutal than any outsider could have predicted. With Grace out of the picture, Lionel reveled in his newfound freedom. Celeste quickly moved into his posh penthouse. Parties became more frequent, each one wilder than the last. They hosted epic gatherings where New York's social media elite rubbed shoulders with hedge fund managers. Ice sculptures dripped into champagne fountains, international DJs blasted beats until dawn, and paparazzi lurked outside to catch every glimpse of the flamboyant affair. Celeste thrived in this atmosphere. She documented each moment on Instagram. Her million-plus followers feasted on glimpses of the luxurious life, private jets to Miami, designer outfits from Versace, star-studded dinners at Nobu. Lionel soaked up the attention like a drug. Gone was the sense of caution that once balanced his ambition. He spent recklessly, confident his empire could sustain any indulgence. At first, the synergy seemed unstoppable. Celeste's fans flocked to Lionel's fintech services, boosting his user base. Influencers lined up to promote his latest apps. The press, always hungry for dramatic narratives, latched onto the couple's every move. Lionel believed he had transcended the need for caution. His personal brand soared in both mainstream finance and pop culture. But behind the scenes, cracks were starting to form. Competitors circled, envious of his market share. Stretched thin by overexpansion, Lionel's company made a risky foray into cryptocurrency speculation, betting millions on volatile assets that soared one moment and crashed the next. Meanwhile, the extravagances at home gulped funds faster than any healthy business could replenish. Private planes and seven-figure art purchases weighed heavily on corporate expense accounts. For all her youthful charm, Celeste was no business strategist. She egged Lionel on, cheering whenever he proposed the next big gamble. She demanded more extravagant gifts, craving bigger jewels, more exotic trips, flashier cars. She also introduced a new circle of influencer friends who mooched off Lionel's largesse. At times, subtle friction arose. Celeste bristled at the idea of scaling back. She teased that Lionel was acting old whenever he suggested a fleeting moment of caution. Amid this frenzy, Lionel had no time to reflect. He severed ties with old mentors who tried to warn him about leveraged buyouts and overvalued acquisitions. The entire apparatus of his empire balanced precariously on high-risk debt. Deep down, maybe he sensed the risk, but the intoxication of fame and Celeste's unwavering admiration drowned out any alarm bells. While Lionel and Celeste posted selfies from an overwater villa in the Maldives, Grace quietly watched from afar, unsettled by headlines announcing yet another massive deal he had struck. She had known him when he was grounded, morally anchored. Now he seemed possessed by a mania for everything ephemeral: applause, glitz, momentary gratification. Dark clouds hovered on the horizon. The entire house of cards, underpinned by speculation and pride, was about to face the harsh scrutiny of reality. And once the downfall started, not even the brightest spotlight or the loudest social media cheer could shield Lionel from the consequences. Lionel first sensed true danger when a top investor withdrew a hefty stake from his flagship fintech project. The investor cited concerns about corporate governance, particularly Lionel's unchecked spending and the lack of transparency. The moment that news broke, share prices in Lionel's publicly traded company dipped ominously. Celeste tried to brush it off, snapping photos of their penthouse brunch as if nothing had changed. But Lionel grew irritable, snapping at staff when minor details went wrong. He spent late nights hunched over spreadsheets, re-examining profits and debt obligations. The numbers revealed an unsettling truth. If market conditions turned sour, his entire empire could unravel in weeks. To quell anxieties, Lionel started exploring new markets in Asia, hoping fresh capital would offset domestic hiccups. He flew to Singapore, leaving Celeste behind, promising her a future paradise financed by these expansions. But prospective partners in Asia proved wary. Rumors circulated that Lionel was over-leveraged. Over dinners, local financiers expressed polite interest, yet they never committed. He returned home with only half the funds he had hoped to secure. Back in New York, the media shifted tone. The same outlets that once glamorized Lionel's flamboyant lifestyle began calling attention to his ballooning line of credit and questionable acquisitions. Pundits on Financial Talk shows labeled him the next cautionary tale. A whisper campaign suggested internal strife at his fintech firm, with key executives resigning in quiet protest over Lionel's lavish personal spending from corporate accounts. Celeste sensed his stress but wasn't prepared to scale back. She announced a plan to launch her own fashion line, expecting Lionel to foot the bill. Eager to keep her happy and preserve their image as an unstoppable power couple, he reluctantly agreed. More money poured out, fueling a brand that had no proven revenue model. The heavy swirl of parties, promo events, and marketing stunts continued unabated. Late one evening, exhausted and tense, Lionel scrolled through social media to see Celeste posting a video of them dancing in the penthouse, champagne in hand, a fleeting show of defiance. He read the comments. Some fans praised them as couple goals, but cynics mocked, calling him the sugar daddy of a fame-hungry influencer. Anger flared within him. He felt misunderstood. Couldn't they see he was building an empire? Desperate to maintain the facade of success, Lionel doubled down on his attempts to secure loans. He reached out to old acquaintances, ignoring the acrimonious history with some. Doors slammed in his face. Even those who once revered him hesitated, citing the volatile market. A wave of fear gnawed at Lionel's confidence. He started popping sleeping pills to quiet his mind at night, though they did little to quell the dread. Across town, Grace watched from a distance. She too heard the whispers that Lionel's empire was precarious. Although she had every right to feel vindicated, a pang of sadness stirred in her chest. Despite his betrayal, she had once loved the man. Now he perched on the edge of catastrophe, and pride alone prevented him from reaching for a lifeline. The first real crash came swiftly. A high-profile deal Lionel had pursued with a European tech consortium crumbled at the last minute, after auditors discovered inconsistencies in his firm's reported earnings. Panic spread among shareholders. The stock plummeted overnight by 30%, wiping millions from Lionel's wealth in hours. Frenzied calls flooded his office, clients demanding reassurance, banks asking pointed questions. Amid the chaos, Celeste retreated into her own bubble. She posted curated selfies, plastering a beaming smile as if ignoring the financial meltdown. She launched a new wellness retreat brand collaboration, expecting Lionel to fund it. Her illusions of indefinite luxury left Lionel alone to wrestle with looming bankruptcy. Anxiety twisted his gut as he scrambled to calm both employees and investors. The illusions of grandeur he had spun were unraveling at breakneck speed. In a desperate bid to stave off collapse, Lionel sought a private loan from a shadowy venture capitalist known for predatory interest rates. With no other recourse, he signed the deal, injecting temporary liquidity into his firm. But the conditions were draconian, chaining him to monthly payments so high they strangled the company's cash flow. His CFO quit in protest, citing unethical and reckless management. More employees followed, unsure if they'd be paid next month. Board members convened an emergency meeting, questioning Lionel's leadership. Some demanded his resignation. He fought back, ranting about loyalty and short-term thinking. But behind the tirade lay mounting panic. Bankers threatened to seize assets if he missed loan deadlines. Rumors of an SEC investigation into potential stock manipulation surfaced, igniting further public distrust. The tabloids reveled in the drama. Fintech king's fortune crumbles, read one headline in the New York Daily News. Influencer watchdog accounts on Instagram gleefully dissected Celeste's role, mocking her lavish spending. She found herself targeted by online trolls, calling her a gold digger. Overnight, brand sponsorships vanished. Furious, Celeste confronted Lionel, demanding he fix it. He lashed out, blaming her constant appetite for luxuries, fueling costs that spiraled out of control. Their penthouse gatherings dwindled as they tried to cut expenses, but it was too little, too late. Bill collectors pounded on the door. The carefully curated illusions they had built, like the marble floors, the Hermes furniture, the designer wardrobes, threatened to slip from their grasp. In a final blow, their building's management demanded thousands in overdue fees, threatening eviction if not paid. Lionel found himself kneeling on the penthouse floor one sleepless night, head in his hands, haunted by regrets. He remembered Grace's calm voice, urging fiscal responsibility, the times she tried to keep them grounded. He had thrown her aside for an illusion of endless excitement. Now, that illusion was dissolving in humiliation. Even if he survived financially, he recognized a deeper void gnawing at his soul. The betrayal had cost him the one person who genuinely loved him beyond the trappings of success. Celeste grew restless as financial cracks splintered the life she'd come to enjoy. She watched her follower count drop whenever critics posted evidence of Lionel's failing empire. Her brand sponsorship deals evaporated. Potential partners no longer saw her as a rising star, but as part of a tabloid meltdown. The glamorous events dried up, replaced by creditors banging on the penthouse door. One afternoon, Celeste confronted Lionel with an ultimatum. "Fix this," she snapped, tossing a pile of final notices onto the coffee table. "I'm supposed to be launching a fashion brand. How can I do that if we're broke?" Lionel, eyes hollow from sleepless nights, glowered at her. "Don't you think I'm trying?" he retorted. "My entire firm is on the brink. I'm stuck paying interest rates that bleed us dry. You can't keep demanding more." Celeste bristled. She had grown accustomed to a life of VIP excess. Now she was forced to scale back, skipping hair appointments, re-wearing dresses. She saw her own reflection in the penthouse mirrors, feeling less like a star and more like a trapped figure in a decaying gilded cage. That evening, as Lionel tried to secure last-ditch funding, she scrolled her phone, ignoring him. DMs from admirers peppered her inbox. Some wealthy men hinted at new opportunities. A cunning idea took shape. Within days, Celeste began meeting discreetly with one of these admirers, a real estate magnate who had once flirted with her at an event. She posted cryptic Instagram stories from fancy restaurants, not with Lionel, but with an ambiguous male silhouette. Rumors spread that she was distancing herself from the sinking ship. Late one night, she returned to the penthouse to find Lionel poring over bank statements, eyes bloodshot. He asked where she'd been. She lied about just meeting a friend. Finally, the tension snapped. After another argument about money, Celeste packed her suitcases. In a moment of brutal candor, she told Lionel, "I can't stay here waiting to go down with your bankrupt empire. I have my own life to salvage." He pleaded, shock lacing his voice, but she waved him off. "You used to be unstoppable. Now you're a loser who can't pay the bills," she spat. "I'm not sacrificing my future because you made stupid choices." And just like that, the mistress he'd sacrificed everything for walked out the door, leaving him with unpaid bills and a tarnished reputation. Lionel sank onto a couch, numb. The penthouse, once filled with laughter and glitz, echoed with emptiness. In the hush, he recognized the final cruelty of his choices. The wife who once supported him was long gone, and the mistress he chose instead had shown her colors. He was truly alone, teetering on the brink of total ruin. Celeste's departure signaled the final unraveling of Lionel's precarious empire. Without her promotional influence, social media chatter turned venomous, mocking him as a jilted millionaire whose golden life had turned to rust. Investors continued fleeing in droves, accelerating the collapse. Lenders insisted on immediate repayments, citing breaches of contract. The stock price of his fintech firm plunged into penny territory, effectively worthless. In desperation, Lionel tried to liquidate personal assets, his exotic cars, the lavish artwork he boasted about. But the market for such items was fickle, and potential buyers smelled blood in the water. They offered insultingly low bids, effectively cornering him into massive losses. He parted with a $200,000 painting for barely a quarter of its value, a $300,000 sports car for half its worth. Meanwhile, banks froze his lines of credit, suspicious of any transfer that smelled like a cover-up. Reports emerged suggesting possible financial misconduct. A culture of reckless spending, possible misrepresentation of corporate revenues. The SEC launched a preliminary inquiry, sending formal requests for documents. Lionel spent hours with lawyers trying to pass disclaimers that might shield him. Yet each question about his finances left him floundering for coherent answers. With no stable income, the penthouse fees went unpaid. Building management served him an eviction notice. His attorney recommended filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy to reorganize, but even that seemed fraught. As the cunning venture capitalist who'd given him a predatory loan threatened a lawsuit claiming fraud, Lionel realized he was in a labyrinth of legal battles that would devour whatever scraps of fortune he still possessed. News media feasted on his downfall. The once heroic self-made man now served as a cautionary tale in prime-time financial commentary. Late-night talk shows ridiculed him. Memes circulated of Celeste wearing a crown while Lionel knelt, wallet empty. The venom stung, but deeper was the gnawing feeling that he deserved it, that his arrogance had paved this road. Amid the chaos, Lionel found a single folder in his safe, a set of old documents labeling Grace as co-founder in early draft agreements. She'd left the official company structure years ago, but the memory of their shared dream tore at him. He recalled how she once insisted on thorough audits, risk management, stable expansions. Everything he had scorned. Now, the only person who might have saved him from ruin was the one he'd cast aside. But how could he ever face her after discarding her so cruelly? He stared at the crumpled eviction notice, tears pricking his eyes. This is what you wanted, endless freedom, endless fame, he thought bitterly. And now it was all slipping through his fingers like sand in a broken hourglass. The day Lionel was forced to leave. The penthouse was a stark, chilly morning. Building staff watched as movers hauled out the last of his belongings. He tried to maintain a shred of dignity, wearing an expensive coat that felt oddly out of place in this humiliating scene. The elevator ride to the lobby felt interminable. He used to glide down those floors, feeling invincible. Stepping onto the curb, he glanced around for the usual paparazzi. Only a handful snapped photos, the story of his demise already losing its freshness to new scandals. He squeezed shut his eyes, recalling his younger self, hungry for success. How did it all go so wrong, he wondered. When did I morph into this desperate shell, scouring for quick fixes and fleeting admiration? He checked into a modest suite at a business hotel near the outskirts of Manhattan. No doorman to greet him by name. No eager staff asking for instructions on fresh flower arrangements. The subdued environment gave him time to think, though that also meant confronting regrets he had long repressed. Each evening, he stared at the flickering glow of a cheap lamp in that sterile room, mind flooded with images of Grace's tear-streaked face when he admitted his affair. Calls from lawyers became daily occurrences. The SEC investigation intensified, requiring him to produce reams of documents. The potential lawsuit from the predatory lender loomed, threatening personal assets he hadn't even realized were at risk. Collectors demanded payment, threatening to seize anything of value he had left. One late night, Lionel scrolled through social media in a haze, stumbling upon Grace's profile. She rarely posted, but there was a recent photo, Grace standing in front of a small, newly opened consulting office, smiling alongside two colleagues. Her face looked peaceful, her posture exuding confidence. He noticed supportive comments praising her perseverance, though some references alluded to her ex-husband's downfall. A pang of guilt stabbed him. He typed a message, hands trembling, Grace. I'm so sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm proud you're doing well. He stared at the screen, reading. His heart hammered. Finally, he hit send. That night he fell into a restless sleep, not sure if he deserved even her acknowledgement. Morning arrived with no response from Grace. Days passed, Still nothing. Perhaps she'd blocked him, or maybe she was just ignoring him. Lionel tried not to dwell on it, focusing on his immediate battles, but the sense of emptiness grew heavier. Without Celeste's illusions and that social media adoration, without the promise of easy millions, he was left confronting the bare truth. He had chased vanity, feeding an ego at the expense of genuine love. And now, standing on the precipice of ruin, he realized how truly alone he was. A week after his eviction, Lionel received a cryptic email from an old acquaintance, Mariella Hughes, a boutique venture capitalist who once admired his early success. She'd cut ties when Lionel's dealings grew too erratic. Now, her message read, "I heard you're in trouble. If you want to talk, meet me at the Chatham Cafe tomorrow noon." Lionel arrived at the Chatham Cafe with a mix of hope and dread. Mariella sat by the window, swirling a latte. She greeted him politely, but with the demeanor of someone doing a reluctant favor. Without preamble, she laid out the reason for summoning him. "There's a possibility we could help refinance your debts," she explained. "But it would require total transparency, plus some form of collateral. Also, a partner to vouch for you. We don't trust you alone, Lionel. Your track record is unfortunate." His thoughts leaped to Grace, but she had no reason to help. She wasn't even responding to his messages. Observing his hesitation, Mariella sighed. "Look, if you can't secure a reputable co-signer or strategic partner, it won't work. I'm sorry." With that, she stood, leaving him with a business card and a silent challenge: find someone who still believed in him or remain bankrupt. Feeling cornered, Lionel roamed Manhattan for hours. Twilight enveloped the skyscrapers by the time he gathered the courage to approach Grace's new consulting office. The sign read Remington Consultancy in elegant letters. Through the glass door, he spotted her typing away at a sleek desk. Heart hammering, he stepped inside. The receptionist recognized him from old photos and frowned. Before she could say anything, Grace looked up, startled. She rose, crossing her arms in guarded posture. "What brings you here, Lionel?" Her tone was calm, maybe a bit cool, but not overtly hostile. He swallowed. "Could we talk privately?" She hesitated, then led him to a small conference room. He took in the modest furnishings, the faint scent of lavender. It felt miles away from the life they once shared. "Look, I know I have no right to ask anything of you," he began, voice quivering. "But there's a chance I can salvage my company if I find someone who's willing to partner or co-sign." "Mariella," she said, "I need a credible backer." Grace's eyes flickered with an unreadable emotion. "And you came to me? Why? After everything you did? The affair, the public humiliation?" Lionel bowed his head. "Because despite all that, you're the only person who truly understands my business, who once believed in me. I'm begging for help. If you don't want to, I won't blame you. But I had to ask." A tense silence followed. Grace studied him, noticing the lines of stress etched on his face, the humility that was once so foreign to him. Then, surprisingly, she said softly, "I'll think about it. You may not deserve this, but let me see the details. I do have conditions." His breath caught in relief, tears stinging his eyes. "Anything," he whispered. In that room, for the first time in a long while, Lionel felt a flicker of genuine gratitude. Whether or not Grace chose to help, simply offering him a glimmer of mercy was more than he dared hope for. 2 days later, Lionel returned to Grace's office, clutching a folder of financial statements, business projections, and a revised plan for the battered fintech firm. Grace looked over the documents carefully, her professional demeanor highlighting the transformation she'd undergone. No longer the overshadowed partner, she exuded the calm confidence of someone who understood her worth. As Lionel explained the refinancing deal, Grace asked pointed questions about risk mitigation, corporate governance, and how he intended to rectify the questionable practices that toppled him. He answered with earnest detail, referencing advice from Mariella's team. He admitted wrongdoing, acknowledging that his arrogance had led to short-sighted expansions and flamboyant personal spending. For once, he didn't sugarcoat or shift blame. Finished, Grace clasped her hands together. "You want me to co-sign with Mariella, essentially guaranteeing part of the loan with my new consultancy's credibility," she clarified. Lionel nodded, eyes pleading. "Yes, on the condition that I step back from day-to-day leadership. We'd create a new board structure with tight controls. Mariella's firm, and you would hold veto power on major financial decisions." Grace leaned back, exhaling. This arrangement would potentially save Lionel's firm from immediate liquidation, allowing partial debt restructuring under stricter oversight. But it also placed Grace in a risky position if Lionel couldn't meet obligations. Her fledgling consultancy might suffer collateral damage. She weighed the pros and cons, recalling how he once supported her ambitions before everything twisted. "I have conditions," she said at last. "First, full transparency. Any attempt to hide finances or revert to reckless spending, the deal is off. Second, I want a formal apology public. Not for me personally, but for the people who invested in your illusions and lost everything." Lionel's throat tightened. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "I'll apologize. I'll meet the families that lost money and do my best to compensate them." Grace observed him for a moment. She saw sincerity in his remorse. Yet she remained vigilant, trusting him fully was not an option. Still, something in her recognized that even a small step toward redemption might be better than leaving him to wither in bitterness. She extended her hand. "All right, I'll present this to Mariella and see if we can finalize terms." His eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Thank you, Grace. I know I don't deserve it, but thank you." She nodded curtly, concealing the swirl of emotions. "This is business, Lionel, nothing more." Yet, as she watched him gather his papers, her heart felt a pang of sorrow for the man he used to be. If all went well, the restructured firm might salvage some of the employees' jobs, maybe even repay small investors. It wouldn't erase his betrayal, but it might carve a path to atonement. Outside, the crisp air stung Lionel's cheeks as he stepped onto the busy sidewalk. For the first time in months, a tiny surge of hope pulsed in his chest. He wasn't sure if he could ever reclaim respect in Grace's eyes, but perhaps he could prove he wasn't beyond redemption. That alone would be worth any hardship the future held. In the weeks that followed, Lionel labored under the new structure hammered out by Grace and Mariella's team. He stepped down from his CEO role, accepting a more constrained position as an advisor. Board members installed by Mariella scrutinized every expenditure. The flamboyant aura that once surrounded Lionel, flashy cars, expensive dinners, star-studded events vanished overnight. A press conference was arranged for him to publicly address the meltdown of his empire. Cameras whirred as journalists gathered, ready to pounce with hard questions. Lionel, trembling slightly, took the podium. Gone was the swagger. He wore a simple suit, face etched with remorse. He apologized to investors, employees, and partners. He admitted to letting hubris drive him toward reckless expansions and personal indulgences. The sincerity in his voice surprised many. Some found it contrived, but others saw a man genuinely chastened. While not a magical fix, the new arrangement allowed partial debt forgiveness in exchange for a share of any future profits. The controlling stake in Lionel's old firm effectively transferred to Mariella's group, with Grace's consultancy offering strategic oversight. A fraction of the lost funds could be recouped if the reorganized entity stabilized. For the first time, Lionel approached business decisions with caution and humility, During this period, he reconnected with a few ex-employees, offering apologies and hearing their stories of stress when the firm nearly collapsed. Some accepted his contrition, others scoffed and walked away. Yet he persevered, determined to face the consequences of his mistakes. As for Grace, she maintained a professional distance. She'd meet Lionel in boardrooms or strategy sessions, but their relationship remained formal. Once, after a lengthy meeting, they found themselves alone in a hallway. She noticed the shadows under his eyes, the slump in his posture. The memory of him as a vibrant dreamer flashed through her mind, and for an instant, she felt empathy. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He shrugged, offering a weary half-smile. "I've made my bed, Grace. I'm just grateful you allowed me a chance to fix some things." She nodded, pressing her lips into a thin line. A moment passed, heavy with unspoken words. Then she turned and walked away. Outside the boardroom walls, Lionel lived modestly in a small apartment near the office. He cooked simple meals, no longer able to rely on personal chefs. Invitations to exclusive gatherings dwindled. Celeste was a distant memory. She'd moved on to a rumored fling with a European actor. At night, he read business case studies on cautionary tales, seeing echoes of his own story in each page. Gradually, the reorganized firm found stability. A subdued brand image replaced the glitz. Loyal employees who stayed recognized the shift in leadership's tone. Profits trickled in, building a foundation for future expansions. And though Lionel's personal wealth was a fraction of what it had been, he felt a measure of solace in forging something sustainable, built on honest collaboration rather than narcissistic illusions. Months evolved into a year under the restructured company's watchful eye. Lionel's old bravado never fully returned. Instead, a quiet determination took its place. He arrived at the office early, left late, fixating on tasks that might mend relationships with previous clients. Some deals blossomed, small but steady, laying a sturdy foundation for the business. Meanwhile, Grace's consultancy thrived. Word spread of her keen insight and fair, methodical approach. She expanded her client roster, occasionally lending strategic pointers to the firm Lionel once helmed. Despite this overlap, they rarely saw each other outside of scheduled meetings. Their personal bond, severed by betrayal, remained delicately paused. One evening, after a marathon session reviewing the firm's quarterly results, Grace lingered in the conference room with Lionel. The numbers showed a modest profit, enough to begin paying back some smaller investors. A sense of relief hummed in the air. "You did well," Grace said, shutting her laptop. "This quarter's return means a lot of people will recover some of their losses." She offered a soft nod of acknowledgement. Lionel gazed at her, gratitude filling his eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you. Honestly, you saved me from utter ruin." She studied him for a moment, recalling the naive dreamer who once vowed to conquer the world by her side. "I didn't do it for you," she replied, voice tinged with bittersweet honesty. "I did it for the employees, the investors, and maybe the memory of who you used to be." Silence stretched as they packed up. Then Grace took a breath. "Look, I'm not sure what the future holds. But if you stay on this path, doing right by people, I believe you can find some measure of peace." Lionel nodded, blinking away a sting of tears. "I still regret everything," he whispered. "Throwing away our marriage, chasing illusions. I know I can't undo it, but I'm sorry." Grace's eyes glistened. She offered a small, sad smile. "Life moves forward, so must we." With that, she gathered her purse and stepped out into the corridor. For a moment, Lionel stood alone, hearing the echo of her footsteps fade. He realized redemption was a journey, not a finish line. The trust once destroyed couldn't simply be willed back, but perhaps over time, an honest respect could take its place. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. He was a man stripped of illusions, Forging a new identity from the wreckage of arrogance and betrayal, Lionel emerged into the crisp night air, uncertain but resolute. He had lost his fortune, his illusions, and the mistress who once seemed irreplaceable. Yet in that vacuum, he rediscovered the value of genuine effort and moral responsibility. Tomorrow promised no miracles, but offered a glimmer of hope that a life rebuilt on steadier ground might hold more true satisfaction than all the hollow glitz he once worshipped. In the end, Lionel Prescott stood as living proof that a life of excess and betrayal can collapse in a heartbeat, leaving behind only regret and a chance, if one is lucky, for redemption. His journey from triumphant millionaire to bankrupt outcast served as a harsh lesson. Success built on arrogance, fueled by shallow desires, ultimately rings hollow. Only through genuine remorse, painstaking effort, and humility did he begin to repair a fraction of the damage done.
While his pregnant wife cried at home. The millionaire posted vacation. Pics with his mistress. Then came the audit. They say that beneath every polished photograph lies a truth we dare not expose. Meet Mark Rutherford, a millionaire who appeared to have it all, a sprawling empire, gleaming sports cars and high society connections from New York to Monaco. His social media profiles flaunted sun-kissed getaways with an alluring woman at his side, but the world didn't know the tears he left behind. At home, Mark's pregnant wife, Angela, anxiously awaited his return, watching in despair as he posted glamorous vacation photos with his secret mistress. Little did he realize that a brutal audit loomed on the horizon, poised to shatter his perfect facade. At first glance, the life of Mark Rutherford looked like a fairy tale. Hailing from a modest neighborhood in upstate New York, Mark had ascended the social and financial ladder at breathtaking speed. He had rebranded himself into a savvy businessman who moved effortlessly in circles filled with CEOs, philanthropists and venture capitalists from Manhattan. Guests at his lavish parties would whisper about Mark's meteoric rise, debating whether his success was the product of ruthless cunning, uncanny luck, or possibly both. His wife, Angela Rutherford, had grown up in an entirely different environment, sunlit farmland just outside Buffalo, A. Kind and gentle soul. Angela had fallen for Mark's charm when they were young. In those early years, he possessed a rare combination of drive and tenderness. She could still recall the day he proposed an intimate picnic near a serene lake where he vowed to cherish her forever. Although the lake was hardly a glamorous setting, the genuine emotion in Mark's eyes made every breeze and sunbeam feel like divine blessings upon their union. Their first few years of marriage were marked by humble dreams and long conversations about building a stable future. Angela had a warm smile and an unyielding belief in Mark's potential. She supported him when he launched his first company, a small tech startup, funded by meager savings and the generosity of a few distant relatives. She listened patiently to his late-night brainstorming sessions and scribbled business plans on napkins. She believed wholeheartedly in the man who had once promised her that no matter how high he soared, he would never leave her side. But success, as it often does, transformed Mark. The better the company did, the more Mark's life became a whirlwind of red carpet galas, midnight phone calls with overseas clients, and secretive deals that always seemed to happen behind closed doors. Angela initially chalked it up to the demands of business. He was forging connections, building a network, ensuring they would never again fret about money. But as Mark's taste for luxury intensified, so did the gap between them. No longer content with a quiet dinner at home, he began to crave expensive restaurants, dinners with powerful executives, and weekends aboard yachts docked in exclusive marinas. During this swift transition from middle-class comfort to extravagant wealth, Angela sometimes felt like a relic of Mark's past. She struggled to navigate the new social circles he so eagerly embraced. It wasn't that Angela lacked sophistication, she simply had a different set of values. Surrounded by glitzy soirees and endless champagne flutes, Angela found herself quietly pining for their old lives, where a single bouquet of daisies and an evening stroll could ignite her spirit more than any five-star event. When Angela discovered she was pregnant, she hoped it might rekindle the warmth and closeness they once shared. She dreamed of Mark's strong arms wrapped around her, whispering excited plans for a nursery. Yet from the very first conversation, she sensed his excitement was tainted. Instead of wholeheartedly celebrating her news, he mumbled something about how a baby might complicate ongoing deals. She tried to reassure him that they would navigate parenthood just like any other challenge, united by love and commitment. But the more her belly grew, the more Mark seemed to drift. Business expansions, urgent calls from Hong Kong, clandestine texts that he refused to show her. These all took precedence. Angela, in the softness of her heart, convinced herself that Mark was merely stressed. He was under intense pressure, or so he said. If anything, it was a testament to how dedicated he was to providing a secure life for their future child. She held on to that thought like a lifeline, refusing to consider more troubling possibilities. Meanwhile, Mark privately relished his newfound status among the mega-rich. He had formed partnerships with influential names. One such person was Richard Caldwell, a private equity mogul known for his hush-hush real estate acquisitions from Manhattan to Los Angeles. Caldwell quickly became more than just a business contact. He was also Mark's mentor in the art of living lavishly, constantly reminding him, wealth is not just about what you own. It's about how you display it. Between the constant swirl of business negotiations and late-night private gatherings at Caldwell's penthouse, Mark found himself on a slippery slope of moral compromises. It wasn't just about ignoring Angela. He was now drawn to a lifestyle where excess blurred ethical lines, and where loyalty even to one's spouse became just another disposable commodity. In the back of his mind, Mark rationalized everything. He was simply seizing opportunities that his younger self could only dream about. After all, once the dust settled, he'd settle down. He promised himself he would eventually focus on family life. Among the wave of new faces entering Mark's life was Cassie Delgado, a striking woman with flowing auburn hair who exuded confidence and ambition. She first appeared on the scene as a marketing consultant recommended by one of Mark's investors. Their initial meeting took place in a sleek Manhattan boardroom, and Cassie left a powerful impression. She had a knack for reading a room, understanding its power dynamics, and adjusting her tone to sway the conversation in her favor. Mark watched, half amazed and half envious, as she negotiated cutting-edge promotional deals with an ease and flair that rivaled his own. She was more than an adept negotiator. Her presence was magnetic. Cassie was the kind of woman who seemed to invite confessions and temptations, her laughter hinting at secrets waiting to be uncovered. When Mark discovered she came from a modest background much like his, he felt an immediate sense of kinship. She too had clawed her way up from near obscurity. They bonded over shared stories of once living paycheck to paycheck, mocking the condescending attitudes they endured from privileged elites. And yet, while Angela's gentle innocence had once captivated Mark, Cassie's fierceness both inspired and intimidated him. On the surface, they formed a natural professional alliance, two driven personalities with matching hunger for wealth and influence. Beneath that veneer, however, a different chemistry was building. Mutual admiration soon morphed into flirtatious texts, then secret coffee dates under the guise of client meetings. Cassie was shrewd enough to know exactly what she wanted. She was not a naive romantic easily carried away by Mark's charms. She calculated every advantage that could be gained from their liaison. Whenever Mark talked about his personal life, Cassie would gently place a hand on his shoulder, tilt her head with empathy, and convince him that she alone understood his pressures. At first, it was subtle comfort during stressful work situations. But as time wore on, those stolen moments felt like portals to an alternate reality, where Mark wasn't obligated to be the doting husband or expectant father. He was free to indulge in Cassie's wiles, free to forget that Angela existed at home, softly crying herself to sleep. Each clandestine meeting fueled an adrenaline rush, unlike anything Mark had felt before. One evening, Cassie invited him to a high-end fashion show, after party, an event teeming with celebrities and socialites. Mark reasoned it was good for networking, so he attended in the dimly lit VIP lounge amid pulsing music and expensive champagne. Mark kissed Cassie for the first time. Angela was thousands of miles away in Buffalo for a prenatal checkup, but even if she had been in the same city, Mark doubted the outcome would have changed. Cassie was intoxicating. For a while, their affair was their best-kept secret. Mark rationalized that no real harm was done. He was merely satisfying a physical and emotional itch. Business thrived, and Mark promised himself that once the baby arrived, he would end it. He pictured a scenario in which he'd gracefully cut ties with Cassie, quietly return to Angela, and no one would ever know. But the more he tried to imagine an exit strategy, the deeper he sank into Cassie's enticements. Before long, Cassie began to sense Mark's warring guilt. She was nobody's fool. She noticed the anxious tone in his voice after each rendezvous and spotted the wedding ring he rarely took off. Yet she never pushed for a more official status. She didn't need to. Her hold over him was strong enough, and she reaped benefits as his preferred consultant, winning her lucrative contracts. Unbeknownst to Mark, Cassie also had connections in other circles. She heard whispers of the IRS investigating not just Mark's businesses, but also Caldwell's. These tidbits floated around black tie galas and hush-hush dinners. She gleaned from passing remarks how Mark's deals sometimes skirted the edges of legality. It was all speculation, but she kept it stored in the back of her mind should she ever need an ace up her sleeve. Angela, meanwhile, was growing more anxious by the day. Mark's excuses for his long absences piled up crucial deals, hectic travel schedules, emergency client meetings at odd hours. At times, Angela tried to voice her concerns, but Mark always brushed them off with dismissive gestures, telling her not to stress herself out during the pregnancy. Each time she felt a nagging sense that something was deeply amiss, but she forced herself to believe Mark's explanations. After all, how could the father of her unborn child be unfaithful? He was the man who once sobbed tears of joy when she agreed to marry him. Yet on nights when the loneliness grew unbearable, Angela couldn't help scrolling through Mark's social media, analyzing every new post or tagged photo like a detective on the verge of an explosive revelation. She couldn't place it exactly, but she sensed that the radiant smile on Mark's face in those pictures wasn't the same one he reserved for her or once had. Something vital had changed. It was as if he had found a new source of excitement, leaving Angela feeling more invisible with each passing day. Angela had no idea that an even bigger betrayal was about to blow their world apart, that her husband's business partner was really a mistress, and neither Mark nor Cassie suspected that the glittering tapestry of their covert romance was about to be torn asunder by forces far beyond their control. After all, if there's one thing life teaches us, it's that no secret can stay hidden forever, and that a reckoning is inevitable when you've built your castle on shifting sand. At home, each day of Angela's pregnancy crawled by like a slow-moving storm cloud. She had hoped that her growing belly would be a beacon of joy for both her and Mark, proof that love could endure beyond the manic hustle of corporate life. Instead, she found herself more alone than ever. Friends suggested prenatal yoga, childbirth classes, or baby shower plans, but Angela found it hard to join in the celebrations. How could she rejoice when Mark seemed only half present? Angela's symptoms, morning sickness, mood swings, and constant fatigue, were magnified by emotional distress. Nights brought panic attacks that left her trembling under the covers, her tears dampening the pillow. Where was the partner who had once held her tight, reminding her that everything would be okay? Where was the man who had promised to love her in sickness and in health? When she tried to reach out, the phone calls went unanswered or were hurriedly cut short. Mark's texts, once affectionate, devolved into bullet points of half-hearted excuses. He reassured her, big project in Hong Kong, investors in town, busy with conference calls, will be home soon. Angela yearned to believe these promises, but as the weeks went on, she could sense the widening gap. She sought solace in memories of happier times, the first months of their marriage, in a small but cozy apartment, the simple act of cooking dinner together, laughing at inside jokes no one else could understand. Now the mansion they called home felt like an empty museum, its gilded ornaments and plush furniture mocking her loneliness. The house staff, housekeeper, chef, and driver tried to care for Angela, but their presence only highlighted Mark's absence. One evening, determined to bring back a shred of normalcy, Angela arranged a special dinner, complete with soft candlelight and her favorite homemade lasagna. She spent hours meticulously preparing each ingredient, all in hopes that Mark would come home and remember the love they once shared. She waited, her heart pounding at each passing minute. Midnight came and went, and by 1 a.m, the lasagna was cold and her tears were hot on her cheeks. Mark never walked through the door. Days blurred together in a monotonous cycle of doctor's visits and heartbreak. Angela's obstetrician, Dr. Viola Bankrupt, gently advised her to minimize stress, emphasizing how harmful chronic anxiety could be for both mother and baby. Angela tried. She practiced deep breathing exercises, wrote in a journal, and consulted with a pregnancy counselor. In private moments, she'd place her hand on her belly, speaking softly to the life growing within her. She promised her unborn child that no matter what, they would be loved. Even if Mark never returned to them in the way he once was, Angela resolved to be strong. But that resolve wavered whenever Angela spotted something suspicious online. Mark's social media, once a tame collection of business achievements and philanthropic engagements, had transformed into a gallery of exotic beaches, poolside cocktails, and glamorous parties. And he wasn't alone in these photos. A beautiful red-haired woman, sometimes tagged as Cassie Delgado, appeared in the background, or sometimes right by Mark's side. The two looked far too comfortable, far too close. Angela tried to reason with herself that maybe it was innocent, a professional associate or a friend. Yet the intimacy in their smiles felt like a dagger in Angela's heart. She dared not question Mark about it directly. She feared the answers she might get, or worse, the way he might dismiss her concerns altogether. Still, the seed of suspicion grew fueled by late-night social media stalking and the silent agony of her intuition. Each time Angela tried to bring up Cassie's name, Mark would brush it off, repeating lines like, "She's a valuable consultant," or, "We're finalizing a huge deal, stop worrying." Angela's internal turmoil escalated until one night she broke down completely. She found herself curled up on the floor of the master bedroom, phone clutched in her shaking hand, sobbing uncontrollably. The images of Mark's apparent happiness with this other woman tormented her. Her growing stomach only served as a painful reminder that while her body prepared for motherhood, Mark seemed to be living a carefree, childless existence. Amid her tears, Angela realized something she was witnessing. Mark's transformation into the kind of man he once despised, someone who put material success and fleeting pleasures above everything else, including loyalty and love. The questions piled up. Could she trust him anymore? Would he even want to be part of the baby's life? And what if these business trips were mere covers for wild vacations with Cassie? Quietly, Angela decided that if Mark refused to come home to her, she would seek the truth on her own terms. She began to imagine confronting him directly, to see his reaction, to see if he'd lie to her face. For Angela, the days of silent suffering might soon come to an end. But before she could fully plan her confrontation, fate began its own countdown. Forces were converging behind the scenes, angry investors, suspicious auditors, and the unstoppable momentum of gossip that swirled through the social circles Mark desperately tried to impress. Unaware of the storm that lay ahead, Angela continued to cling to one fragile hope that Mark would redeem himself before it was too late. Beachfront villas, crystal blue waters, and indulgent spa treatments at world-class resorts. This was Mark's new normal whenever he traveled with Cassie. The pair found endless excuses to combine work trips with scenic getaways, posting tastefully curated snapshots on social media. In each photo, Mark radiated a carefree smile, as if the sum of his worries amounted to nothing more significant than choosing the next cocktail to sip. Cassie orchestrated every shot, understanding the power of optics. She took great care to capture Mark against a backdrop of towering palm trees, their fronds swaying above him like a king's canopy. In some photos, Cassie stood at the edge of the frame, an enigmatic figure sipping champagne. The images ignited social media buzz and gossip in their swanky circles. Who is that stunning redhead with Mark Rutherford? Is she his new business partner or something more? The speculation only added to the thrilling aura of their forbidden escapade. For Mark, the vacation pics served a dual purpose. First, they fed his ego. After years of hustling to get recognized by society's upper echelons, he relished every like, comment, and message praising his amazing life. Second, they were a form of self-deception. If he convinced the world he was happy, maybe he could stifle the nagging guilt in his conscience. Guilt about leaving Angela alone at home, pregnant and distraught. Of course, Mark conveniently never mentioned Angela in these posts, nor did he reveal the existence of an unborn child. He rationalized that it was a private matter, not suited for public consumption. When friends and acquaintances inquired about Angela, he'd respond with vague statements. "Oh, she's busy preparing for the baby," or "traveling isn't safe for her right now." He avoided deeper questions at all costs. The last thing he wanted was an unscripted interview on how his personal life was unraveling. Cassie, meanwhile, reveled in her rising social profile. She found herself tagged in photos by influencers and minor celebrities who recognized Mark's wealth and Cassie's clever marketing strategies. Doors to exclusive events opened, wider brunch invitations from industry heavyweights rolled in. Through all this, Cassie remained calculated. She encouraged Mark to spend more lavishly to cultivate a public image as a worldly magnate on the verge of major global deals. That meant private jets instead of first-class commercial flights, dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, and suites in the most luxurious hotels. Mark complied, though each charge made his accountants and financial managers increasingly anxious. None of this extravagance occurred without cost. Mark's fluid capital was tied up in high-risk ventures. Liquidity was tighter than appearances suggested. He juggled lines of credit and questionable transactions, leaning heavily on Caldwell's counsel. Caldwell, too, urged Mark to keep the momentum of success going. "Fake it till you make it" was essentially their unspoken mantra. As long as public perception remained, stellar deals would keep flowing, and the heavy interest rates and balloon payments could be pushed further into the future. But cracks in the glossy surface began to form. On a particular getaway in Fiji, Mark received a barrage of frantic texts from his CFO. Financial regulators were poking around. Some suspicious wire transfers were flagged. Panicked investors were demanding clarifications on how Mark's so-called expansions aligned with his sudden personal spending. Mark tried to brush it off, determined not to let anything ruin his beach holiday with Cassie. He reasoned that this was just a minor hiccup. Nothing a few well-placed phone calls and quick financial maneuvers couldn't fix. Cassie, ever attuned to the slightest shift in Mark's mood, pressed him for details. He only offered vague reassurances about routine audits and overzealous inspectors. This was the first time she witnessed a real worry flicker behind Mark's confident facade. Sensing the potential threat to her cushy arrangement, Cassie tried to downplay it, coaxing him back into the carefree zone. They snapped more radiant selfies on the shore, hoping to drown out reality with digital illusions. Unbeknownst to them, Angela was scrolling through these very pictures. At that moment, tears streaming down her cheeks as she recognized the hotel's name from a travel magazine. The woman in Mark's arms wasn't just a business partner. No professional consultant gazed at a client with such intimate adoration. Angela felt a sharp ache in her chest as she realized how little Mark cared about hiding his betrayal. The audacity of his posts was almost surreal. Desperation clawed at Angela's insides. Perhaps confronting him through a phone call where she could hear his voice break if he lied was her best shot at forcing the truth. Gathering her nerve, she dialed Mark's number. No answer. She tried again and again, only to be met with voicemail. Anger flared up in her, a rage she'd never felt before. This was no longer a series of unfortunate misunderstandings or too busy at work moments. This was blatant humiliation. In the background, the swirl of an IRS investigation was growing stronger. Anonymous tips and suspicious transaction reports had caught the attention of forensic accountants who were beginning to follow the money trail. The timing of Mark's lavish travels raised red flags. Why, they wondered, would a businessman under such financial scrutiny broadcast opulent holidays across social media? Didn't he realize that auditors often examine lifestyle displays as part of their case? For Mark, ignorance felt like bliss. The more pictures he posted, the less real his looming problems seemed. Yet reality was closing in fast. The golden sand and azure waves might have served as a temporary stage for his fabricated paradise, but the tides were about to shift. And when they did, they'd wash away more than just footprints in the sand. While Mark and Cassie soaked in, the Fiji Sun agents at the Internal Revenue Service's Manhattan branch started piecing together fragments of an intricate puzzle. Spearheading the investigation was a meticulous auditor named Mallory Finch, reputed for her tenacity and keen ability to spot inconsistencies in vast financial records. Mallory had received a discreet tip about Mark Rutherford's questionable income streams, and once she opened his file, she discovered an alarming mismatch between his reported earnings and the lifestyle he flaunted. Mallory was never one to jump to conclusions, but the more she dug, the more anomalies she found. A sudden influx of capital suspiciously timed with Mark's social media updates of private jet getaways, a pattern of shell companies popping up in multiple states, then vanishing without clear financial statements, offshore accounts vaguely tied to Mark's business, some of which contained substantial deposits from individuals flagged for previous tax evasion. These pieces raised her eyebrows, and Mallory suspected this investigation could balloon into something far larger than a mere tax discrepancy. Her next step involved contacting individuals who might share insights on Mark's dealings. One name that kept surfacing was Richard Caldwell, the private equity mogul rumored to have a hand in Mark's expansions. Caldwell himself was already under IRS scrutiny for unrelated properties in Florida and the Carolinas. If Caldwell and Mark were pooling resources in some illicit scheme, it could spell big headlines. Mallory prepared requests for bank statements, wire transfers, credit card expenditures, anything that would illustrate the true scope of Mark's financial empire. At the same time, Mark's CFO, Brian Cummings, was drowning in chaos. As soon as he noticed the heightened interest from regulatory authorities, Brian tried to warn Mark, but each call went unanswered, each email unreturned. Panic thrummed in Brian's chest. The entire finance department was on edge, especially after receiving official requests from the IRS for detailed financial records. Paper trails that Mark had insisted be handled discreetly were now fair game. If Mark didn't address these issues promptly, the meltdown would be inevitable. Behind the scenes, Caldwell played it cool. In public, he would toast Mark as a brilliant entrepreneur and encourage him to keep up appearances. In private, Caldwell had already started distancing himself, transferring assets, and instructing his own legal team to prepare for inquiries. If the walls caved in, Caldwell intended to emerge with minimal damage, leaving Mark to shoulder the brunt of the consequences. Word of the looming audit spread quietly through Manhattan's financial circles. Bankers and lawyers connected to Mark had hushed luncheons, speculating about the magnitude of his troubles. Some predicted he'd face a heavy fine at best, or a full-scale criminal investigation. At worst, a few even took delight in the prospect of Mark's downfall, viewing it as an inevitable collapse for a man who rose too fast, spent too freely, and believed himself untouchable. Meanwhile, Angela was oblivious to the complexities of Mark's finances. Her world was confined to heartbreak and concern over her unborn child. She knew Mark must be in trouble. The abrupt changes in his behavior, the money he threw around so casually, the hush-hush deals he once mentioned but refused to elaborate upon. Yet she couldn't fathom the depth of the scandal brewing. Each day her anxiety deepened, a feeling that something catastrophic was hovering just out of sight. It all came to a head when Angela received a strange phone call from one of Mark's junior associates, a woman named Kara Hoffman. Although Kara didn't divulge specifics, she sounded panicked. "Angela, I don't know if you're aware, but there are investigations going on. Things look bad." Angela's heart pounded in her ears as Kara's words spilled over the line. "We're being asked for documents, receipts. I think Mark's in serious trouble. And look, this might not be my place, but I think you should know Mark's not who he used to be." Angela thanked Kara, her mind spiraling with questions. What exactly were they investigating? Had Mark committed fraud? Was he actually bankrupt and hiding the truth? The uncertainties gnawed at her. She ended the call feeling more determined than ever to confront Mark. She realized that her heartbreak over his possible affair was only one part of a bigger, uglier picture. If he was entangled in financial crimes, her unborn child's future would be at stake too. In Fiji, Mark was irritated to see a slew of missed calls from Brian and a cryptic text from Caldwell. "We need to talk ASAP." He tried to keep his calm exterior, but Cassie noticed the worry lines etched across his brow. Over an expensive bottle of wine at a cliffside restaurant, Mark finally admitted to her that the IRS might be launching a routine audit, but insisted it was nothing major. Cassie, who had heard different rumors from her insider network, suspected it was more serious than Mark let on. Yet she feigned reassurance, drawing Mark into a languid embrace. They'd handle it together, she cooed. They were unstoppable when united. That night, however, Cassie stepped outside onto the moonlit beach and placed a phone call to one of her closest confidants, an attorney who specialized in corporate law. Just in case she wanted to know her rights and potential liabilities, if Mark went down, Cassie had no intention of going down with him. Far away from that tranquil beach, Mallory Finch and her team worked late hours, scanning through reams of documents. Something big was surfacing, a web of shell companies, unaccounted funds, and potential tax evasion, so blatant it nearly dared the authorities to react. As she compiled her findings, Mallory sensed a storm about to erupt. The wealthy always believed they could outrun the law, but in her experience, hubris was their undoing. She gave a final glance at Mark's social media feed, scoffing at the gall of a man who flaunted paradise while standing at the brink of a scandal. Angela stood at the top of the grand staircase, the late afternoon sun illuminating her pregnant silhouette as she awaited Mark's return. She had summoned every last shred of courage to do what she should have done weeks ago, demand answers face to face. The house staff, sensing the tension, made themselves scarce. Rarely did Angela request the entire household's presence be minimal, but now she needed privacy. She needed space to unleash her anguish without an audience. Finally, Mark entered, dragging a suitcase behind him. He looked exhausted, yet still wore that forced confidence he had perfected in boardrooms. Angela's throat constricted at the sight of him. This was the man she'd once adored, now nearly a stranger. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger and hurt. Mark's immediate instinct was to deflect Angela. "I've just come off a long flight. Can we do this later?" He began massaging his temples dramatically, but Angela stood firm, crossing her arms protectively over her belly. "No, now." A tense silence fell between them in the marble-floored foyer. Angela had rehearsed this confrontation dozens of times in her head, but the actual moment felt surreal. She started with the obvious, his social media posts. She demanded to know who the woman was, whether Cassie Delgado was truly just a consultant. Mark tried to dismiss it as exaggerated rumors describing Cassie as a business partner who happened to be a close friend. Yet Angela's tears and fury dissolved any illusions. She raged at him for abandoning her during the pregnancy, for flaunting a lavish lifestyle, while she dealt with swollen ankles, hormonal surges, and sleepless nights alone. Her voice rose with each accusation. She brandished printouts of Mark's social media pictures, her hands shaking violently. "You think I'm stupid? Look at how she stares at you in these pictures." Her tears glimmered in the light, but her voice stayed sharp, revealing a hidden steeliness that Mark was unprepared for. Cornered Mark tried to justify himself. He mumbled about stressful deals and complicated emotions, as though that gave him a license to betray her. Sometimes, I feel trapped. Our life, it got so big, so fast. I never wanted to hurt you." But Angela's eyes, filled with betrayal, told him that any excuse would be hollow. Then came the topic Mark dreaded most: the IRS investigation. Angela slammed a folder onto a nearby coffee table containing the messages and notices she had intercepted from Mark's CFO and legal team. "I'm not a fool, Mark. What's going on with our finances? Are we in danger?" Her voice cracked, revealing not just anger, but a profound fear for the baby's future. Mark went pale. Faced with no way out, Mark finally admitted pieces of the truth, that the IRS was scrutinizing his accounts and that Caldwell was under investigation. He glossed over the details, claiming it was merely a routine check, but Angela knew better. She told him about the phone call from Kara Hoffman, the anxiety in the finance department, the hush-hush rumors swirling in business circles. Mark's casual dismissal of the audit set her on edge. She could see the worry etched in his eyes, belying his false assurances. In that painful moment, Angela realized they were standing on the precipice of something far larger than infidelity. They were at risk of losing their home, their reputations, possibly even their freedom if Mark's dealings were truly illegal. A swirl of confusion overtook her. How could the man she loved, who once saved every penny to buy her a modest engagement ring, have drifted so far into moral bankruptcy, summoning what strength she had? Left, Angela delivered an ultimatum. Either you end this affair, cooperate fully with the investigation, and prove you can be a father, or I'll leave. I won't stand by and let you drag me and our child down with you. Her tone was firm, a quiet declaration that shattered Mark's self-serving illusions. For the first time, he saw in Angela a strength more formidable than he had ever imagined. He stuttered, pleading with her to let him make it. Right, insisting that Cassie meant nothing, that he'd handle the IRS. But Angela stared at him, tears still streaming. She gave him one last chance, an opportunity to come clean and choose family over his addictive chase for wealth and excitement. Mark stood there, drenched in shame and uncertainty, uncertain if he could muster the courage to confront the monstrous problems he himself had created. The moment Mark set foot in his corner office. The next day, he felt the tension in the air so thick it could be cut with a knife. Several of his junior associates were huddled in the hallway, whispering among themselves. His CFO, Brian Cummings, appeared frazzled eyes, lined with dark circles from working through the night. A handful of boxes, filled with financial documents, stood stacked against the walls, evidence that the office had been combed through thoroughly. No sooner had Mark taken a seat behind his expansive mahogany desk than Mallory Finch, the lead auditor from the IRS, entered the room. She introduced herself politely, but her demeanor carried the authority of someone who had already unearthed serious irregularities. Mark tried to maintain his usual cool composure, but Mallory's questions were pointed. We'll need full access to your ledgers, bank statements, and any documentation related to your offshore accounts, she stated, her voice calm yet unyielding. One by one, Mark's staff delivered files to Mallory and her audit team. The entire office felt like a crime scene, with accountants and lawyers picking through every line item, every receipt and every contract. Mark attempted to project an air of cooperation, hoping that by acting transparent, he might reduce suspicion. Yet behind the facade, panic flared in his chest with each document he signed over. Over the following days, Mallory's team uncovered evidence of large sums of money flowing through shell corporations. Whenever Mark tried to feign ignorance, Mallory presented him with email correspondences or suspicious wire transfer confirmations bearing his digital signature. In meeting after meeting, Mark struggled to explain the labyrinthine structure of his business dealings. He found himself stumbling over the complexities, some of which Caldwell had orchestrated. Meanwhile, Caldwell was conspicuously absent. Phone calls to him went straight to voicemail, and cryptic text messages offered no real support. Mark finally reached Caldwell's lawyer, only to be informed that Caldwell was unavailable and that Mark should speak to his own legal counsel. Though Mark's official stance remained that he and Caldwell were partners, Caldwell had begun insulating himself from the fallout. Cassie, too, seemed suddenly distant. She had been helpful before, but once the audit gained momentum, she avoided dropping by the office or appearing with Mark publicly. She insisted it was best to keep a low profile until the situation blew over. Privately, Cassie was assessing whether Mark was worth sticking around for, or if she should jump ship to protect her burgeoning career. The glow of their sun-drenched vacations felt like a lifetime ago. Now every conversation crackled with tension. Amid the chaos, Angela received a flurry of calls from Mark's lawyers, advising her to limit any public statements or social media posts that might affect the ongoing investigation. Though she had no intention of speaking publicly, she understood the subtext. They feared she might vent her frustrations, potentially exposing more of Mark's secrets. She responded politely, but remained on guard, reluctant to trust anyone paid by Mark's questionable fortunes. But for Angela, the real challenge was emotional. She felt paralyzed, uncertain whether to believe Mark's repeated assertions that he was handling it. With each day, her baby grew inside her, a silent testament to the gravity of the life choices swirling around her. She was torn between anger, heartbreak, and the faint hope that Mark could somehow rectify the damage he'd wrought. As the audit wore on, Mark's worst fears materialized. His personal finances, those he had guarded most fiercely, were now under scrutiny. Mallory's team discovered that some of his lavish personal expenses were siphoned directly from corporate accounts. Worse, there was evidence of tax fraud, with Mark claiming deductions for luxury trips that in reality had nothing to do with legitimate business. It was the perfect storm for a case that could escalate beyond simple fines into criminal charges. In a tense meeting late one evening, Mark's legal counsel laid everything on the table. If you don't fully cooperate and provide any remaining documents, the IRS may pursue charges. You could face prison time, Mark reeled. Jail had never been part of his wildest calculations. He had assumed that being wealthy and well-connected would insulate him from serious legal consequences. Now that protective veil was disintegrating, needing a lifeline. Mark attempted to reach out to Caldwell one last time. To his shock, Caldwell's phone was answered by a cold, automated voice announcing the number had been disconnected. A follow-up call to Caldwell's office revealed that the mogul was allegedly overseas for an extended period. Mark cursed under his breath, realizing he had been left to fend for himself in a lion's den. The man who had once toasted to their partnership was now vanishing like smoke. That night, Mark sat alone in his office, the city lights glimmering through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the scattered paperwork that spelled doom for his financial empire. He considered calling Cassie to vent or beg for comfort, but the prospect of another hollow reassurance made his stomach churn. As he stared at the final remnants of his once grandiose aspirations, a pang of regret rattled him. He had traded his wife's love and his family's future for fleeting thrills and illusions of grandeur. Now the audit threatened to expose every lie he'd told to Angela, to the world, and most damningly to himself. In the days that followed, the audit expanded, touching not only Mark's direct holdings, but also affiliated partnerships. News leaked, leading to sensational headlines. Millionaire entrepreneur under IRS probe, high-flying lifestyle meets harsh reality, and partner of Richard Caldwell, questioned in major tax evasion case. Journalists began digging into Mark's background, painting him as the poster child for new money gone awry. Every flashy social media post he'd made with Cassie became tabloid fodder. The images relabeled as evidence of possible embezzlement. His office phone rang incessantly with calls from investors, business associates, and even distant relatives who wanted their slice of the truth or an explanation of how he'd tarnished the family name. Mark's PR team scrambled to contain the fallout, spinning statements about how he was fully cooperating with authorities. But the tone was grim. and the public consensus leaned toward condemnation. People love a success story, but they find an equal or perhaps greater thrill in watching a figure stumble, especially one who had reveled in ostentatious displays of wealth. Cassie Delgado, once an ever-present source of excitement, showed up unannounced at Mark's office one evening. Her eyes darted nervously around the reception area, where agents and lawyers were busily poring over boxes of files. She slipped into Mark's private suite, shutting the door behind her with a soft click. Mark, physically and emotionally drained, looked up surprised and guarded. She spoke in a hushed tone, a tremor in her voice, betraying the panic beneath her practiced composure. "Mark, this is getting out of hand. The IRS could start looking into every transaction I handled for you. My name is on some of those marketing contracts. If they think I'm part of this..." She left the threat unspoken. Mark stared at her, half annoyed, half sympathetic. He realized she had never planned to be caught in a legal quagmire. Her loyalty was as transactional as any of his offshore ventures. In a bid to reassure her, Mark promised that her name would remain clear, insisting she hadn't knowingly committed any crimes. She demanded to see documents, emails, receipts, anything to confirm she wouldn't be implicated. Reluctantly, Mark allowed her a glimpse into some sanitized versions of his accounts. Yet the tension between them was palpable. The illusions of a carefree relationship disintegrated under the weight of potential indictments. Cassie left the office with no promise of a future rendezvous. Meanwhile, Angela found herself navigating a different battleground. Mark's lawyers pressed her to sign documents that would shield certain assets under her name, presumably to separate them from Mark's precarious financial entanglements. Confused and wary, Angela enlisted a lawyer of her own. She wasn't about to let Mark's shady dealings ruin her credit or her standing, especially with a baby on the way. "Protect yourself," her lawyer advised. "You don't want to be tied to anything that could be seized if this goes south." At night, Angela wrestled with a storm of emotions. She was furious with Mark for placing her in such a precarious position, but also worried about the father of her child potentially facing prison. Her moral dilemma festered. Should she stand by him in hopes that he'd transform back into the man she once loved? Or should she cut ties, safeguarding herself and her baby from the inevitable destruction amid this maelstrom? Mark's friend-turned-mentor, Richard Caldwell, maintained an enigmatic distance. Whispers circulated that Caldwell had fled to a non-extradition country or was in the process of shifting assets to offshore havens. A single short letter from Caldwell's legal team arrived at Mark's office, disclaiming any responsibility for Mark's financial decisions. It stated, Caldwell was prepared to cooperate with authorities if he was subpoenaed. Mark felt a chill at the underlying threat Caldwell might cut a deal that implicated him in exchange for leniency. In desperation, Mark tried to salvage at least one partnership. He invited one of his key investors, Michael Evans, a man he once considered a friend, to dinner at an upscale restaurant. The objective was to reassure Evans that the business still had potential, that Mark's personal troubles wouldn't sink their joint ventures. But over the flicker of candlelight, Evans drummed his fingers on the table and coldly remarked, "I invested in your vision. Mark, not in your vanity. Now it seems all you cared about was flaunting money you didn't even have." The meal ended early with Evans walking away, refusing to share even a parting handshake. Humiliation sank heavily into Mark's gut doors that once opened for him. Private clubs, elite investment groups were swiftly closing. Rumors and half-truths spread. People who had lauded him for his risk-taking brilliance now labeled him reckless or even criminally negligent. Each day felt like a war of attrition on his spirit, culminating in the knowledge that he had orchestrated his own downfall. In a final desperate effort, Mark turned to Angela, swallowing his pride. He arrived at the mansion late one evening drenched by a sudden rainstorm, and found her in the living room, reading pregnancy guides by the flickering fire. Collapsing to his knees beside her, Mark pleaded for her forgiveness, promising to set everything right. He vowed to cut ties with Cassie and even threatened legal action against Caldwell, swearing he would devote himself to her and their unborn child if she would just stand by him through the audit. Angela listened with weary eyes. She wanted to believe him, yearned for the possibility of redemption. But trust is not an infinite resource. However profound her love might have been, it was battered and fragile now. "Mark," she whispered, voice trembling. "I need more than promises. I need a reason to believe you'll truly change for once." Mark had no clever comeback, no glib assurance. He simply held Angela's hands in his own, the silent tears mixing with the rainwater dripping from his hair. Yet in her mind, Angela couldn't shake the image of him, carefree on some exotic beach, while her tears stained the floors of an empty home. Whether he was truly remorseful or just desperate to avoid utter collapse, she couldn't quite discern. The inevitable moment came one crisp autumn morning. Mark received a summons detailing the IRS's intent to pursue charges of tax fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to evade taxes. Although formal indictments had not yet been filed, the document spelled out enough to shake Mark to his core. If convicted, he could face hefty fines and potentially years behind bars. News outlets pounced on the story, fueling public outrage over Mark's ostentatious lifestyle at the expense of unpaid taxes and possible illegal gains. Overnight, he became a pariah. The viral hashtag #RutherfordCoreReckoning trended across social media, accompanied by pictures from his once vaunted Instagram feed. Memes ridiculed him as a cautionary tale of greed and moral decay. As the IRS case progressed, Mark's lawyers advised him to seek a plea deal, something that might reduce jail time if he cooperated fully and revealed any co-conspirators. Mark balked at first. The mere idea of turning on Caldwell felt like a betrayal. But Caldwell had already disappeared from Mark's life, leaving a trail of plausible deniability. There was no loyalty to preserve anymore. In a tense meeting with his legal team, Mark agreed to provide detailed accounts of his transactions with Caldwell and the shady practices they had employed to mask income. It was a desperate act, akin to dragging others into the fire to lessen his own burns. Mark felt equal parts anger and shame. His once proud confidence had eroded, leaving behind a man grasping for any lifeline. Meanwhile, Angela watched from the sidelines, sickened and heartbroken. She was summoned as well, though primarily as a witness. Her name was on certain joint bank accounts. Her baby bump had grown. Each kick reminded her of the new life she was trying to protect. She prepared herself to testify, truthfully determined not to lie for Mark. If he had ever truly loved her, he wouldn't force her into the role of accomplice. Cassie Delgado, too, was called for questioning. While her official work for Mark's firm was deemed legitimate, investigators wanted to ensure she wasn't complicit in any financial crimes. Terrified of criminal charges, Cassie painted herself as merely an employee, someone who had no role in Mark's financial decisions. She cooperated, answering every question about Mark's whereabouts, his corporate spending, and how business expenses often appeared suspiciously personal in nature. With her personal involvement clarified, Cassie walked away unscathed, albeit her reputation irreparably tarnished. The final blow to Mark's empire came with a court-ordered freeze on many of his assets. His mansion went into foreclosure, luxury cars were repossessed, and his bank accounts were seized, pending further legal proceedings. One by one, employees in his companies were laid off, fueling bitter resentment from families who relied on those paychecks. Mark couldn't meet payroll or vendor obligations. He watched helplessly as everything he'd built, the offices, the brand, the illusions, crumbled. Angela made the difficult decision to move out of the mansion before the bank officially reclaimed it. She refused Mark's tearful requests to stay by his side, insisting they needed space to reflect. She settled temporarily in a modest apartment near her parents, choosing to focus on her well-being and the baby's imminent arrival. Her lawyer had successfully shielded her personal finances, ensuring she wouldn't be dragged into Mark's legal vortex. On the day Mark finally accepted the plea agreement, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, cameras flashed. As he walked in, his hair unkempt, dark circles under his eyes. The same man who once strutted in designer suits now wore a resigned expression and an off-the-rack outfit. In front of a judge, he spoke words he never envisioned uttering. "I plead guilty, Your Honor." The plea involved cooperating with ongoing investigations into Caldwell's network, offering testimony regarding their underhanded financial schemes. Though prison time was nearly certain, it might be lessened due to his cooperation. Standing in that courtroom, Mark felt a nauseating swirl of regret. He flashed back to simpler times, when a faithful wife, a small apartment, and a dream for a better life had been enough. How far he had strayed. Walking out to a chorus of shouted questions from journalists, Mark said nothing. His lawyer shielded him, guiding him into a waiting car. As they pulled away, he glimpsed a billboard on a nearby building. It displayed a gleaming tropical scene, with a couple laughing on a beach, a seductive advertisement for holiday packages. He closed his eyes, remembering his social media posts with Cassie under exactly such a sun. The irony was as bitter as the metallic taste of fear and regret on his tongue. In the ensuing weeks, Mark prepared for sentencing. The judge would weigh his cooperation against the severity of his crimes. He resided in a small, barren apartment, a far cry from his former luxury. The silence at night was deafening, and sleep evaded him. He alternated between making calls to his remaining legal counsel and drafting letters of apology to employees, to business partners, and most painfully to Angela. While Mark grappled with his new reality, Angela focused on hers. She continued prenatal checkups, often accompanied by her supportive mother. Away from the oppressive gloom of Mark's downfall, Angela found moments of calm, even happiness. She set up a simple nursery in her parents' home, painting the walls a gentle shade of yellow. As she folded tiny baby clothes, she felt a blend of apprehension and resolve. The future was uncertain, but she would not let Mark's mistakes define her child's life. As Mark approached his sentencing date, he met again with Mallory Finch, the steadfast IRS auditor who had spearheaded the case. Despite her unwavering professionalism, Mallory sensed the tragic undertones of Mark's journey. She had encountered dozens of wealthy individuals who believed themselves untouchable, but Mark's downfall seemed particularly steep. When Mark thanked her, an odd moment of gratitude to the person who had effectively unraveled his life, Mallory simply responded, "I hope this leads you to a better path." On a chilly winter afternoon, Angela went into labor, surrounded by her mother, her sister, and a compassionate medical staff. She brought a healthy baby boy into the world. She named him Daniel, honoring her grandfather. As she held her son for the first time, tears rolled down her cheeks. This was a new beginning, fragile, beautiful, and untainted by the sins of the father. Mark, informed by letter, received the news in his prison cell. He felt a pang of both joy and sorrow, imagining the life he could have shared with them, if only he hadn't succumbed to greed and self-indulgence. Restricted by concrete walls and razor wire, he could only dream of a day he might hold his child. He resolved that if he ever got the chance, he would be a better man. This real-life drama story of grandiose wealth, crushing betrayal, and hard-earned redemption reminds us that no amount of luxury can outweigh the value of loyalty and honesty. Mark Rutherford's rise and fall echo a stark warning beneath every glittering facade. Lie choices that can shatter families and futures if we allow greed to eclipse our moral compass. Angela's journey underlines the power of inner strength. By choosing integrity over complicity, she protected not just herself, but the next generation